Commander Daniel Harper stood in the great hall of the Valkyrie Imperial Palace and tried not to scream. Around him, 1,000 alien faces turned and stared. Some had 4 eyes. Some had none. Some had skin that glowed like starlight. All of them looked at Daniel and his small crew like they were insects that had crawled into a palace where they did not belong. The Valkyrie were the oldest race in this part of the galaxy. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with long limbs and skin that changed color with their feelings. Right now, the ones looking at Daniel showed pale green. He had learned that pale green meant something between pity and amusement. They thought he was funny. They thought all humans were funny. Daniel wore his best uniform. The dark blue fabric had been pressed 3 times. The metals on his chest had been polished until they shone. But standing among these ancient beings who had traveled between stars while humans were still living in caves, he felt small. He felt like a child wearing his father's clothes. "The human delegation," announced a voice that rang through the hall like a bell. Commander Daniel Harper of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge. 1,000 alien eyes turned to him. Daniel felt sweat run down his back. He had commanded a warship through battles that would give most people nightmares. He had made decisions that cost lives and saved others. But this was different. In battle, he knew the rules. Here, one wrong word could destroy everything. He walked forward with his crew behind him. Lieutenant Maria Santos walked on his right. She was his communications officer and the only one who could speak the Valkyrie language without a translator. On his left walked Dr. Kevin Walsh, the ship's medical officer, who had insisted on coming because he wanted to study alien biology. Behind them came 4 security officers who had been told to smile and keep their hands away from weapons they were not allowed to carry. The Empress sat on a throne made of crystal that sang quietly in frequencies humans could barely hear. She was old, even by Valkyrie standards. Her skin glowed with soft golden light, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. When she looked at Daniel, he felt like she was reading every secret he had ever kept. "You are welcome in our empire, young ones," she said. Her voice was kind, but there was something beneath the kindness. Something that said she was being polite because it cost her nothing, not because she thought humans deserved respect. Daniel bowed the way he had been taught. "We thank you for receiving us, Your Majesty. Humanity hopes this meeting will be the first of many between our peoples." The Empress smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "Many young races have said such things. We will see what becomes of yours." The next 3 hours were torture. Daniel was passed from noble to noble, each one asking the same polite questions that were really insults wrapped in pretty words. How long had humans been traveling in space? Only 200 years? How charming. What was their world like? Oh, just 1 sun and 1 moon? How simple. Did they have art? Music? Culture? Oh, how delightful that such a young species was trying. Daniel smiled and answered each question. He complimented their palace, their clothes, their ancient history. He pretended not to notice when a Tortian ambassador made a joke about humans still having hair like animals. He pretended not to care when a Mercathi diplomat asked if humans had stopped killing each other yet. But inside, something was building. A pressure in his chest that grew with every pitying look and every condescending smile. These aliens knew nothing about humanity. They saw a young species that had barely learned to walk among the stars. They had no idea what humans had survived, what they had done, what they could do. Maria touched his arm. "Commander, are you all right? Your face is very red." Daniel forced himself to relax. "I'm fine. I just need some air." He excused himself from a conversation with a being that looked like a walking tree and had been explaining, very slowly and with small words, how faster than light travel worked. Daniel had studied faster-than-light physics since he was 15. He had published papers on improving engine efficiency that were used throughout the human fleet. But he smiled and thanked the tree creature for the lesson because that was what the mission required. The balcony was supposed to be closed. A guard with 4 arms stood in front of the door, but Daniel had learned something valuable in his years of service. Most guards did not expect anyone to simply walk past them with confidence. He nodded at the guard, said something polite about needing to see the moons, and walked through the door before the guard could decide whether to stop him. The night air hit his face like cold water. 3 moons hung in the purple sky, each one a different color. The largest was silver, the middle one was red, and the smallest glowed soft blue. Below the balcony, the Valkyrie capital city spread out in all directions. Towers of crystal and light reached toward the sky. Flying vehicles moved between them like fireflies. It was beautiful. It was ancient. It made Earth's greatest cities look like children's toys. Daniel gripped the balcony railing and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for hours. The railing was made of some kind of crystal that was warm to the touch. Behind him, the garden was full of plants he could not name. Flowers that seemed to sing, trees with leaves that flickered with inner light. The air smelled sweet, like honey, and something else he could not identify. He was alone. Finally, completely alone. No alien eyes watching him. No polite insults to smile through. No mission to think about. Just him and the alien sky, and the weight of everything he could not say. Daniel began to talk. He did not know why. Maybe because the pressure in his chest had grown too large to contain. Maybe because he needed to hear the truth out loud, even if no one else would ever know. Maybe because he was tired of pretending. "They have no idea," he said to the empty air. His voice was quiet, meant for no one. These Valkyrie, these ancient and wise beings, they look at us and see children. Babies who learned to walk last week. They don't know what we are. They can't know. He laughed, and the sound held no happiness. It was the laugh of a man who knew a joke that no one else would understand. If they knew what humanity has been through, they would never sleep again. They would look at us differently. Not with pity, with fear. Because we are not children who stumbled into space by accident. We are survivors of things that should have killed us 100 times over. And we're still here. We're still standing. And we will never, ever stop. The words hung in the air. Daniel did not know that someone was listening. He did not see the shadow move behind a pillar of singing crystal. He did not hear the soft gasp of someone who had just heard something impossible. He just kept talking, letting the truth pour out of him like water from a broken dam. The truth about what humanity was. The truth about what they had survived. The truth about why they were really here. And in the shadows, Princess Sarah Valkorath pressed her hand over her mouth and listened to every word. Princess Sarah Valkorath had escaped to her garden because she could not stand another moment of her mother's plans. The Empress had spent the entire evening introducing her to potential husbands from noble houses across the empire. Each one had been tall, proper, boring, and completely convinced that marrying the princess would be the greatest gift she could ever receive. Sarah had smiled. She had made polite conversation. She had pretended to be interested in their achievements and their bloodlines and their promises of power. But inside, she had been counting the minutes until she could slip away to the one place in the palace that belonged only to her. The balcony garden was her sanctuary. It connected to her private chambers through a hidden door, and only she and her personal servants knew how to access it. The singing crystals and glowing flowers had been planted by her grandmother 300 years ago. When Sarah stood among them, she could almost feel her grandmother's presence. Calm and wise and far away from the noise of court politics, she had been sitting among the flowers. letting their soft songs wash away her frustration. When she heard footsteps on the main balcony, her first feeling was anger. No one was supposed to be here. The balcony was closed for the evening specifically so she could have privacy. Then she heard the voice. It was speaking standard Galactic, but with a strange accent she had never heard before. The words were rough and hard, like rocks tumbling down a mountain. She realized with shock that it was the human commander, the one her mother had called amusing and primitive, the one the entire court had spent the evening mocking behind polite smiles. Sira moved silently through the garden. Her people had evolved to hunt in the forests of their homeworld, and she could walk without making a sound when she chose. She pressed herself against a pillar of blue crystal and looked out at the main balcony. The human stood at the railing, his back to her. He was so small compared to her people. His skin did not glow. His eyes did not shift color. He looked fragile, like something that could break if handled too roughly. And yet there was something in the way he held himself. Something that did not match what she had been told about humans. 400 years ago, the human said, still not knowing she was there, we almost destroyed ourselves. Not almost. We did destroy ourselves. We just refused to stay dead. Sira's skin flickered to pale blue, the color of surprise. She had read the reports about humanity. Their world was described as green and blue, full of life. There had been nothing about destruction. We discovered how to split the atom, the human continued. Do you know what that means? We learned how to break apart the building blocks of matter itself. And the first thing we did with that knowledge was build weapons. Bombs that could burn cities to ash in seconds. And then we used them. The human's hands tightened on the railing. Sira could see his knuckles turning white even from where she hid. Nuclear war. That's what we called it. Countries launched bombs at each other. The sky turned black with ash. The water became poison. The soil became death. Billions of people died. Billions. Not over centuries. Over days. Sira felt cold. The Valkyrie had fought wars in their history, but nothing like what the human was describing. No Valkyrie war had ever killed billions. No Valkyrie weapon had ever poisoned an entire world. Any other species would have died, the human said. Any sane species would have died. The radiation alone should have killed everyone who survived the initial blasts. But we didn't die. We crawled into holes in the ground, and we waited. We ate food that made us sick. We drank water that gave us cancers. We watched our children be born wrong, deformed, dying before they could walk. And we kept going. The human turned slightly, and Sira could see his face in profile. His expression was hard, like stone that had been shaped by wind and rain over many years. It took 3 generations just to bury all the dead. 3 generations of digging graves and saying goodbye. And while we buried the dead, we also started rebuilding. We cleaned the water drop by drop. We healed the soil handful by handful. We planted trees in irradiated wastelands and watched them grow twisted and strange and beautiful. He paused. And when he spoke again, his voice was softer. It took 200 years. But we healed our world. We brought back species we had driven to extinction. We built new cities on the ruins of the old ones. We looked up at the stars and decided that if we could survive ourselves, we could survive anything the universe threw at us. Sira found herself leaning forward, drawn into the story despite herself. She had studied dozens of species. None of them had ever described anything like this. The idea of a civilization destroying itself and then rebuilding from the ashes was something out of ancient mythology, not recent history. And that wasn't even the worst part, the human said. That was just the beginning. He laughed again, that same bitter sound with no joy in it. 70 years after we reached the stars. 70 years of building colonies and meeting, New species and learning that the universe was bigger and stranger than we had ever imagined. That's when the harvesters found us. Sira's skin turned white, pure white, the color of terror among her people. The harvesters were not supposed to exist anymore. The harvesters had been destroyed 3,000 years ago in a war that had killed billions of Velkari and wiped out entire species. The harvesters were ancient history. Nightmares told the children to make them behave. But the humans spoke of them like they were real. Like they were recent. "I see you don't know that name," the human said to the empty air. He thought he was alone. He thought no one was listening. But you should. Your people should remember it. The harvesters? Machines that eat civilizations. Ships that swallow worlds. They were supposed to be extinct. Your ancestors and a dozen other species sacrificed everything to destroy them 3,000 years ago. But they weren't all dead. Some of them were just sleeping, waiting, drifting in the dark places between stars. Sira could not move. She could barely breathe. Her mind was screaming that this was impossible, that the human was lying or mad or both. But something in his voice told her he was telling the truth. Something in the weight of his words said this was real. They hit our colony on Kepler first. 12 million people. Farmers and engineers and teachers and children. Gone in 6 hours. Not killed, harvested. Taken apart piece by piece and fed into machine factories that turned human beings into fuel and spare parts. The human's voice cracked. My sister lived there. She was a teacher. 3rd grade. She loved her students like they were her own children. I never found out what happened to her. There was nothing left to find. Just empty buildings and blood stains and harvesting marks on the walls. Sira felt something wet on her face and realized she was crying. Her people did not cry often. Their tears were valuable, used in ancient ceremonies and healing rituals. But she could not stop the tears from falling as she listened to the human describe horrors her people thought they had left behind 3,000 years ago. We sent warnings, the human continued. We begged for help. We showed our evidence to every species we had contacted. The Velkari, the Torsion, the Mercathi. We told them the harvesters were back. We showed them recordings of the attacks. Ship signatures that matched your ancient records exactly. He turned and looked up at the 3 moons. You know what they told us? They said we were lying. They said the harvesters were extinct. They said primitive humans were confused or paranoid or trying to manipulate them into giving us technology. They said we were children making up monsters under the bed. Sira felt shame burn through her. Her skin turned deep violet, the color of guilt among her people. She had not been alive when this happened, but her people had been. Her mother had been. And they had done nothing. So we fought alone, the human said. 17 years. 247 worlds. 3.8 billion human dead. We fought the harvesters alone while the rest of the galaxy called us liars and madmen. He straightened his spine, and even though he was small and alone and far from home, he looked like something dangerous. Something that had been through fire and come out harder instead of broken. And we won. The Empress's private war room was nothing like the grand hall where Daniel had spent the evening being politely insulted. There were no crystal decorations or singing flowers here. Just cold metal walls, harsh lighting, and holographic displays that showed every corner of the Velkari Empire. Daniel stood in the center of the room with Princess Sira beside him. Around them, a dozen Velkari advisors and military commanders sat in chairs that rose from the floor like teeth. The Empress herself sat on a smaller version of her throne, watching with eyes that gave nothing away. 3 hours had passed since Sira had demanded this meeting. 3 hours of arguments and objections and threats from nobles who didn't want a human anywhere near the Empress's private chambers. But Sira had used every piece of authority she had. She had called in favors and made promises and refused to back down until her mother agreed to listen. Now the evidence hung in the air around them. Holographic recordings of harvester attacks that humanity had never shared before. Data from the recovered command cores. Energy readings from the edge of the galaxy. The massive shape that had moved and then stopped, waiting. The room was silent. Daniel had finished his presentation 10 minutes ago, but no one had spoken. The advisors were looking at each other, their skin flickering through colors Daniel didn't recognize. The military commanders had gone very still, like predators that had spotted something dangerous. Finally, the Empress spoke. "You expect me to believe that humanity fought and won a war against the harvesters without any assistance from the galactic community?" Daniel kept his voice calm. "I don't expect anything, Your Majesty. I'm showing you what happened. What you believe is your own choice. And this signal, this awakening you speak of, is coming whether you believe it or not. The only question is whether we face it together or separately." One of the military commanders leaned forward. His skin was dark red, a color Daniel had learned meant anger or challenge. "The harvesters were destroyed 3,000 years ago. We lost 4 billion of our people in that war. Are you saying that sacrifice meant nothing? I'm saying it wasn't complete." Daniel pulled up a new display showing the edge of the galaxy. The Alliance 3,000 years ago destroyed the harvester fleets in known space. But the harvesters had bases beyond explored territory, hidden facilities where they built new ships and processed new resources. The Alliance was too broken after the war to hunt them down. So they stayed out there, building, waiting, until they were ready to try again. And you expect us to believe that humans succeeded where the greatest alliance in galactic history failed? Daniel felt old anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help here. Only truth would help. The Alliance 3,000 years ago was fighting to survive, he said. You weren't trying to destroy the harvesters. You were trying to make them stop. When the attacks ended, you stopped fighting. You declared victory and went home to mourn your dead. We did something different. Different how? The commander demanded. We didn't stop. Daniel's voice was flat, hard. When the harvesters attacked us, we learned everything we could about them. Their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses. And when we started winning battles, we didn't celebrate and go home. We tracked their signals back to their bases. We followed their supply lines to their factories. We hunted them across the galaxy for 5 years after the last attack on human space. We didn't want them to stop. We wanted them to die. All of them. Forever. The room was silent again. Daniel could see the advisors exchanging looks. They were starting to understand something about humanity that their reports had never mentioned. Something dangerous. 3.8 billion humans died in that war, Daniel continued. Almost a third of our total population. Everyone lost someone. Parents, children, friends, lovers. The grief was so heavy that some people thought our civilization would collapse under it. But we didn't collapse. We turned the grief into fuel. We let it burn inside us until there was nothing left but the need to make sure nothing like the harvesters could ever threaten anyone again. He looked at the Empress directly. Your people suffered in the first war against the harvesters. I know that. I've read your histories. I've heard your mourning songs. But your suffering ended 3,000 years ago. Ours is still fresh. The last survivor of the first attack died 20 years ago. I knew her. She was my grandmother. The Empress's skin flickered, just for a moment, to pale blue. Surprise. Maybe even sympathy. My grandmother watched her entire colony get harvested when she was 6 years old. She hid in a grain storage unit for 3 days while machines walked past looking for survivors. She was rescued by a human military ship that arrived too late to save anyone else, and she never stopped having nightmares. Not once in 90 years. She died still afraid that the machines would come back. Daniel's voice cracked, but he kept going. She was right to be afraid. The machines did come back. And now something worse is coming. Something that makes the harvesters look like children's toys. We have 30 years, maybe less, to prepare. And I am begging you, on behalf of every human who died fighting alone, to help us this time. The silence stretched on. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Everything depended on this moment. Everything he had worked for. Everything his people had sacrificed thought. Then the Empress did something that made every Valkyrie in the room gasp. She rose from her throne. She walked down the steps toward Daniel. And she knelt. She lowered herself until her eyes were level with his, her great height folding down until they could see each other as equals. "Commander Harper," she said, and her voice was different now. Softer, older, full of something that might have been regret. "Your species was alone because we chose not to help you. We called you liars. We let billions of your people die because we could not accept that a young species might face a threat we believed we had already conquered." Daniel forced himself to breathe. "Yes, we were wrong." The Empress closed her eyes for a moment. "We were arrogant and blind, and we failed you when you needed us most. That failure cost human lives, children's lives, and nothing we do now can bring them back." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "But if you will allow it, we will stand beside you this time, not as protectors of a younger species, not as ancient beings helping primitive children, as allies, as equals, as partners in a fight that threatens all of us." Daniel felt something break open in his chest. Something that had been locked away for so long, he had forgotten it was there. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate hope that kept you fighting when everything was lost. The warm hope that came from knowing you weren't alone. "We would be honored," he said. The Empress rose and turned to her advisors. "Send messages to every species in the Alliance. Call an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Inform them that the Valkyrie Empire recognizes the human warning as legitimate and will be committing full military resources to a joint defense initiative." She paused and apologized, officially and publicly, for what was done to them 50 years ago, for what we failed to do. The advisors scrambled to obey. Military commanders began pulling up logistics displays and fleet positions. The room that had been silent with disbelief was suddenly alive with activity. Syrah moved to stand beside Daniel. Her skin was gold, the color of resolve. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up." Daniel watched the chaos around him. Valkyrie officers arguing about ship deployments. Advisors drafting messages to distant governments. The beginning of something that might save the galaxy or might fail spectacularly. Either way, humanity wasn't alone anymore. "Thank you for listening," he said. 6 months later, the first joint human Valkyrie fleet launched from Earth's orbital shipyards. Within a year, 11 more species had joined the Alliance. Each one had been forced to face the truth that the youngest species in the galaxy had survived the worst of it alone and emerged. Unbroken. Daniel stood on the bridge of his new flagship, watching the Allied fleet move into formation around him. Ships from a dozen species, each one different, each one carrying crews who had finally learned to look at humans without pity or amusement. The thing at the edge of the galaxy was still there, still watching, still waiting. But it was no longer looking at easy prey. And somewhere in the deep black between stars, ancient machinery stirred. Intelligence older than most stars began to notice something unexpected. The test subjects were not behaving correctly. They were not fighting each other. They were not weakening themselves. They were coming together, getting stronger, getting ready. The ancient intelligence did not understand fear. It did not understand resistance. It had never encountered a species that refused to die quietly. It was about to learn. At the edge of The Great Fleet, a small ship, carried a crew of humans who had been born during the war. Children of ash and fire. Grandchildren of the nuclear apocalypse. Great-grandchildren of survivors who had crawled out of irradiated ruins and refused to stop breathing. They looked out at the darkness ahead and felt no fear. Only the patient determination of a species that had learned, through centuries of impossible survival, that giving up was never an option. The stars were waiting. The ancient enemy was coming, and humanity, for the first time in their history, would not face it alone. Sierra could not believe what she had just heard. No species had ever defeated the Harvesters alone. The great alliance that destroyed them 3,000 years ago had included 17 star nations. It had cost 4 billion Velkari lives and wiped out 3 entire species from existence. Victory had been measured not in triumph, but in survival. Both sides had nearly died. That this human, this small and fragile being, stood on her balcony and spoke of victory like it was a fact. Like it was history. Like humanity had done what the entire galaxy working together had barely managed to do, and they had done it by themselves. We didn't just win, Daniel continued, still not knowing she was listening. We didn't just survive. We hunted them. His voice dropped to something cold and hard, like metal that had been frozen in deep space. After the first 5 years, the Harvesters started to run from us. Can you imagine that? Machines that had eaten civilizations for millions of years, running from the species they thought would be easy prey. But we didn't let them run. We built ships designed specifically to track them. We created weapons that could crack their hulls like eggs. We trained soldiers who would fly into the heart of a Harvester mothership and fight until they killed it or it killed them. Daniel turned and paced along the balcony. His footsteps echoed in the quiet night. I was born during the war. My earliest memories are of air raid sirens and evacuation drills. My father was a pilot. He died when I was 7, flying his damaged fighter into the engine core of a Harvester destroyer. He saved 40,000 people on the colony below. I didn't understand that until I was older. When I was 7, I just knew my daddy was never coming home. Sierra wiped tears from her face. She had been raised in a palace, surrounded by luxury and safety. She could not imagine growing up in a war zone. She could not imagine losing a parent to machines that ate people. My mother raised me and my 2 brothers alone after that. She worked in a factory that built missiles. 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 12 years. Her hands were always burned from the chemicals. She never complained. None of them complained. There was no point in complaining. The Harvesters didn't care about our complaints. They just wanted to eat us. Daniel stopped pacing and gripped the railing again. I joined the military when I was 16. They let me lie about my age because they needed everyone who could fight. By the time I was 20, I had killed my first Harvester drone. By 25, I was commanding my own ship. By 30, I had destroyed more Harvester vessels than most admirals twice my age. He shook his head slowly. I'm not special. That's the thing your people don't understand. I'm not unusual for my generation. We were all like that. Every human child born during the war grew up knowing 2 things. First, the machines wanted to kill us all. Second, we were going to kill them first. It wasn't hope. It wasn't bravery. It was just what we did, what we had to do. Sierra had studied military history. She had read about great warriors and legendary battles, but she had never read about an entire species that raised its children to be soldiers. An entire civilization that turned itself into a weapon because the alternative was extinction. The final battle happened when I was 32, Daniel said. We had tracked the last Harvester command fleet to a dead system at the edge of explored space. They had gathered everything they had left. 200 ships. enough firepower to burn a planet to glass in minutes. We brought 300 ships. Every vessel humanity had that could fly and fight. His voice grew distant, like he was watching something happen far away. The battle lasted 9 days. Ships burning in the void. People dying in numbers I can't make myself think about. My best friend, the woman I was going to marry, she was commanding a destroyer that covered my ship's escape from a harvester trap. I watched her ship explode on my sensors. I had to keep fighting. I didn't have time to cry. I didn't have time to scream. I just had to keep fighting. Sarah pressed her hand against the crystal pillar. She needed something solid to hold on to. The story was too much. Too big. Too terrible. On the 9th day, we destroyed the last Harvester command ship. The one that controlled all the others. When it died, the remaining Harvester vessels went dark. Their programming was lost. Their purpose was gone. We spent the next 3 months hunting down every single vessel and destroying it. Then we spent the next 5 years hunting down every hidden base, every factory, every processing facility they had scattered across the galaxy. We didn't leave anything alive. We didn't show mercy. We didn't negotiate. Daniel's voice hardened. The Valkyrie defeated the Harvesters through an alliance that killed billions and broke your civilization. So badly you still sing mourning songs about it. You called it a victory, but it was really just survival. You didn't destroy the Harvesters. You just hurt them badly enough that they went to sleep. He turned and looked toward the palace, though he still could not see Sarah hidden in the shadows. We destroyed them. Really destroyed them. Every ship. Every base. Every piece of programming. We burned it all because we didn't just want to survive. We wanted to make sure nothing like them could ever threaten anyone again. And we did it alone. Without allies. Without help. Without anyone in the galaxy believing we were even telling the truth. Sarah thought about her mother's words at the reception. Young ones, she had called the humans. Like they were children. Like they were nothing. That's what I wanted to say at that reception, Daniel continued. That's what I wanted to scream at every alien who looked at us like we were amusing pets. You have no idea what you're looking at. We are not children. We are survivors. We are killers. We faced the worst thing in the galaxy, and we didn't just survive it. We ended it forever. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tired. So very tired. But I couldn't say that. Because we're not here to boast. We're not here to make them fear us or respect us. We're here because of something else. Something worse than the Harvesters. Something that makes me wish the Harvesters were all we had to worry about. Sarah felt her heart stop. The Harvesters weren't a civilization, Daniel said. They were a tool. A weapon created by something older. Something that's been sleeping at the edge of the galaxy for longer than any species has existed. When we destroyed the Harvesters, we triggered something. A signal. A wake-up call. We found data cores in the Harvester command ships that explained everything. The Harvesters were just the first wave. The test. The species that fail the test get eaten. But the species that pass the test, he trailed off. The species that pass the test get the attention of whatever created them in the first place. And whatever created them is waking up. It knows we're here now. All of us. Not just humans. Everyone. Every species in the galaxy. And it's coming. Sarah stepped out of the shadows. She could not hide anymore. She could not stay silent while this human carried a burden too heavy for one person to hold. How long? She asked. Daniel spun around. His hand reached for a weapon that was not there. His eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed with calculation, then finally settled into something like resignation. How long have you been listening? He asked. Long enough. Sarah walked toward him, her skin flickering through colors she could not control. Fear and guilt and curiosity and something she could not name. "How long do we have?" Daniel studied her face for a long moment. She wondered what he saw. A princess who had lived her entire life in comfort while his people fought and died. A member of a species that had abandoned humanity when they needed help most? Then he answered her question. 30 years. Maybe less. 30 years. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Sira stood 3 feet away from the human commander, close enough to see the lines on his face and the shadows under his eyes. He looked like someone who had not slept properly in years. "You came here to warn us," Sira said. It was not a question. Yes. Daniel did not look away from her. His eyes were brown, she noticed. A simple color, nothing like the shifting rainbow of Valkyrie eyes. But there was something in them. Something old and hard and very, very tired. "Why?" Sira asked. "After what we did. After we called your people liars while the harvesters were eating your colonies. Why would you come here to warn us about anything?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. He turned and looked out at the city below. The crystal towers caught the light of the 3 moons and scattered it into 1,000 colors. "Because the thing that's coming doesn't care about grudges," he said. "It doesn't care that you abandoned us. It doesn't care that we're angry about it. It just wants to end all organic life in the galaxy. Every species, every civilization, every child learning to walk, and every elder passing on their wisdom. All of it, gone." He turned back to face her. "I have 2 nephews. My brother's kids. They're 12 and 14. Smart boys. Kind boys. They want to be explorers when they grow up. They want to see alien worlds and meet strange species and have adventures." His voice cawed. "If we don't stop what's coming, they won't grow up at all. Nobody's children will grow up. And I don't care how angry I am at your people or any other people. I will do anything, beg anyone, to give those boys a chance to live." Sira felt something shift in her chest. She had been taught her whole life that humans were primitive, young, emotional, lacking the wisdom that came with age. But standing here, listening to this man talk about saving children who were not even born yet, she saw something else entirely. She saw someone who had been through fire and come out the other side still caring about others. "What is it?" she asked. "This thing that's waking up. What do you know about it?" Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button, and a holographic display flickered to life in the air between them. It showed a star map of the galaxy, with most of the stars colored blue or green. But at the very edge, in the deep black between galaxies, there was a red glow. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. "We don't know exactly what it is," Daniel admitted. "The harvester data cores were old. Really old. The information was fragmented. But we know some things. It's been there for millions of years. Maybe hundreds of millions. It created the harvesters to test organic species. The ones that failed got harvested for resources. The ones that fought back got marked for something else." "Something else?" "Personal attention." Daniel's voice was grim. "The harvesters were automated. They followed programming. They didn't think or feel or make decisions. Whatever created them is different. It's intelligent. It's aware. And according to the data we recovered, it considers organic life to be a disease that needs to be cured." Sira looked at the pulsing red glow on the map. It was small, just a dot at the edge of the display. But something about it made her feel cold in a way she had never experienced before. "How do you know it's waking up?" Daniel touched the device again. The display zoomed in on the red area, and Sira could see lines of data scrolling beside it. Energy readings, communication signals, movement patterns, For the last 10 years, we've had probes watching that region of space. At first, there was nothing. Just empty void and background radiation. But 5 years ago, things started to change. Energy spikes that didn't match any natural phenomenon. Signals that repeated in patterns too complex to be random. And 6 months ago, something moved. He pointed at a section of the display. Sierra could see a small shape, barely visible against the darkness. That's a ship. Or something like a ship. It's bigger than anything we've ever recorded. Bigger than a Harvester mothership. Bigger than a moon. It moved toward the galaxy and then stopped. Like it was watching, waiting. Waiting for what? We don't know. But we know it's coming. The data from the Harvester cores was clear about that. Once the Harvesters fail, the Creator comes to finish the job personally. We destroyed the Harvesters. We passed their test. And now we've earned the attention of something that makes them look like children's toys. Sierra stared at the display for a long time. Her mind was racing, trying to process everything she had heard. The Harvesters returning. Humanity fighting them alone. A threat older than any civilization she had ever studied. And all of it kept secret because no one would believe the species they called primitive. Why tell me this? She finally asked. Why confess all of this to an empty balcony instead of demanding an audience with my mother? Daniel turned off the display and put the device back in his pocket. Because your mother won't believe me. I've been trying to get meetings with leaders across the galaxy for 5 years. The Valkyrie, the Torsion, the Mercathy, every species we contacted during the war that refused to help us. I've shown them the data. I've explained the threat. They all say the same thing. His voice turned bitter. Humans are young and paranoid. Humans are still traumatized from the war and seeing threats that don't exist. Humans should focus on rebuilding instead of spreading fear. The exact same things they said when we warned them about the Harvesters. And millions of humans died because of it. Sierra felt shame burn through her again. She thought about all the times she had heard diplomats and nobles dismiss human concerns. All the jokes about their short lifespans and emotional nature. All the assumptions that younger species simply didn't understand how the galaxy worked. I came out here to remind myself why I have to keep trying, Daniel said. Because it's hard. It's so hard to keep begging people who look down on you to believe you when their disbelief could kill everyone. I wanted to scream at your court tonight. I wanted to show them recordings of Harvester attacks and ask them how they could have let that happen. But that wouldn't help. That would just make them think I'm unstable. He met her eyes. So I came here. To remind myself that my anger doesn't matter. My pride doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is finding someone, anyone, who will listen. Because 30 years is not very long, and we cannot fight this alone. Not again. Sierra made a decision. It was the kind of decision that could destroy her position at court. The kind that could make her mother furious. The kind that could change everything. What if I believe you? She said. Daniel blinked. What? I'm a princess. My word carries weight. If I demand a private audience with the Empress, she has to grant it. If I tell her I believe you, she has to at least listen. Sierra stepped closer. Show me your evidence. All of it. Everything you have. And if it's real, if everything you've said is true, then you won't face the galaxy alone this time. Daniel stared at her. She could see him trying to decide if this was a trick. If she was playing some political game he didn't understand. If hope was safe or just another trap. Why? He asked. Why would you risk your position for a species your people consider primitive? Sierra thought about her grandmother's garden. About the singing crystals and the glowing flowers. About the stories of the old wars and the lessons about what happened when civilizations ignored threats until it was too late. Because if what you're saying is true, she said. Then position doesn't matter. Politics doesn't matter. Nothing matters except survival. And if my people failed yours once, then maybe helping you now is the only way to fix that mistake. She held out her hand. It was a human gesture. She knew. She had seen humans do it in recordings. A sign of agreement. A promise. Daniel looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he reached out and took it. His grip was strong, warm, solid. The hand of someone who had built things and fought battles and carried burdens that would break most people. "All right," he said. "Let's go talk to your mother."